right, we'll watch for those, and thank you. Could you speak specifically about the impact of the pandemic or what it's had on, specifically on the Nutrition North program and its ability to ensure the communities and I use the Saskatchewan example as these fly-in communities that are south of 60, so to speak, across the country. What has the impact of the pandemic been on the programs like Nutrition North to serve those communities, make sure they have access to affordable food?
Well, what we found, generally speaking, is an uptake by community members on the program. The data that we've been collecting so far seems to indicate an increase in the shipment of food throughout the Nutrition North Canada area. And that is probably as a result of a number of factors. That the one being the increased subsidy on those essential items, bringing those prices quite down to make them even more affordable, I think has had an impact. But there's also been other measures taken by provincial, territorial, and federal governments that has, for example, with the introduction of the CERB benefit, we did notice that also had a correlation on people buying more food through the Nutrition North program. And then also even NTIs and the government of Nunavut, for example, in its most recent response to the pandemic in Arviat and Rankin Inlet, have offered food baskets. Well, that has also had an impact on the overall amount of food bought, and therefore impact on the NNC program.
So maybe could you very specifically maybe tell me how you measure success of a program like this? My understanding is that there's been significant dollars spent, but food insecurity is actually rising in many of these communities still. So what is it actually that we're using to measure success and outcomes?
So two things. One is we have the Northern Food Basket that we track. The overall price of that food basket, it's a representative sample. And then we track the overall price and to make sure that the prices are maintained or lowered over time. So that's one of the big metrics. And then the second is that we follow quite closely is on the actual amount of food that is shipped in the north. So that also gives us an indication of uptake on the program.
Thanks very much. That brings us to time for our next question, set of questions coming from Marcus Pulowski. 6 minutes, go ahead.
Hi, good morning. I wanted to ask about greenhouses. So I'm a doctor. I've spent a couple of years working in Northern Indigenous communities. There's certainly a lot of non-communicable diseases, diabetes, hypertension, obesity, and as a result of that, a lot of heart problems, strokes, blindness, amputations, and I think to some extent it all starts out with diet. I know, having lived a few years in those communities, that it's fairly cheap to buy chips and pop. It's a lot more difficult to buy green vegetables. And even as a doctor who's probably the wealthiest person in the community, I found it very expensive. I know shipping stuff up north is expensive, but how about growing it up north? I know there have been some initiatives here in northwestern Ontario to start greenhouses in Indigenous communities. I recently visited a new facility that was growing marijuana, medical marijuana here in Thunder Bay. It was all hydroponics. They used no natural light. It was all artificial light. I asked about the amount of energy it would take to run it. They said not that much. It seemed like it was something that could be done in fly-in communities, more northern communities. What have we done specifically to try to encourage the development of greenhouses? Because this would certainly seem to me a good way of improving the diet in a lot of northern communities, and as a result of that improved diet, improve people's health. Maybe Mr. Parry, but I don't know if others may want to respond as well.
Thank you for the question. I might turn to my colleague, Mr. Fox, on this point. I would also note, Mr. Chair, that there is another program that's not run by Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada called the Northern Isolated Community Infrastructure Fund that Canor operates, which likely provides support in this area. But John, did you have anything to add?
And you referred to it, Matt, in your opening remarks. There is a project that our science and technology branch is working on with NRCan and others on controlled growth chambers that are scalable for northern communities. It's still at the experimental stage. I actually had an opportunity to visit it in Kemptville. And the only other thing I would add is that under the local infrastructure fund, we do provide up to $250,000 for infrastructure projects, which were intended to cover a gambit of activities that communities may want to explore. They could include greenhouses, but in a lot of cases, those communities are interested in trying out community gardens with root crops that can be grown in the ground over the short growing season in the north. So there is some work being done around expanding growth potential in northern isolated communities.
It would certainly seem to me that that would be an option for us that would be worth exploring. Is there no other source within the Indigenous stream for funding these kind of projects? If a community was specifically interested in pursuing this, what, if any, options would they have?
So our programs don't have a particular Indigenous stream, but we do partner with Indigenous communities in the North, either through our mainstream innovation programming, but also, as I said, through the local infrastructure fund. But you might want to ask either our Indigenous services colleague or our CINA colleague if there are specific Indigenous programs that might address that need.
So if I may, I'll jump in here. I think the program that Mr. Parry identified from Canor is certainly one that's probably the most front and center. One of the things that we've had a lot of discussions with Indigenous communities is the utilization of the Harvester Support Grant, whether that can be expanded to include things like food production and greenhouses. So I think those discussions are ongoing. And then we do also have some climate change and green energy programs here within the department where communities have taken advantage of to help power and provide that supply to greenhouses. But it's very much on a community by community, and there's nothing that's systematic at this point, but it's certainly something that has garnered increasing attention and interest.
A number of months ago, I was talking to Alvin Fiddler, and who's the Grand Chief of NAN, and he was telling me that as a kid, his parents used to grow potatoes and turnips in the garden, and they would have enough potatoes and turnips. His father dug a hole in the ground or something. It was kind of like what's the name of that? But I know the Ukrainian community did the same thing, but they had potatoes and turnips for year round. What, if any, investments have we made in terms of supporting and educating populations in those isolated communities to grow their own food, their own vegetables that they could use in the winter?
We're at 6 minutes right there. So just a quick answer. We might pick it up later. Go ahead.
I'll defer to Mary on the education side of things.
Yes, good morning. Certainly, Indigenous Services Canada provides funding for community-based health programs in First Nations and Inuit communities, including in the North. And these programs and services promote health eating and food skills. And often, communities do want to do community gardens and household gardens and learn more about those things. So, and as well as improve access to healthy foods. So that does definitely come up in the programming, which, you know, has
Sorry to
multiple
interrupt.
objectives.
We're way over. I'm sorry about that.
No problem.
Six